Little did the mocking townsfolk know that this limping veteran with calloused hands was about to unearth a discovery so extraordinary that prestigious museums would soon be fighting over it. A priceless artifact worth millions that had been buried beneath their feet for centuries. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the overgrown fields as Jack Mercer stood at the edge of what was now his property, leaning slightly on his walking stick. His weathered face, marked with lines earned through decades of life's trials, reflected both exhaustion and determination as he surveyed the neglected farmland stretching before him. The property, 40 acres of mostly untamed fields, a dilapidated farmhouse, and a barn that looked like it might collapse in a strong breeze, represented everything the 47-year-old former Marine Corps sergeant had fought for. A chance to build something of his own, on his own terms. 22 years in the military had left Jack with more than just physical scars. The slight limp from a bullet wound sustained during his final tour in Afghanistan was the most visible reminder of his service, but the real battles were fought in the quieter moments when memories surfaced unexpectedly. He'd returned to civilian life 4 years ago, finding work as a security consultant while he saved every penny and planned his next mission. Finding a piece of land where he could create something meaningful. The small town of Riverbrook, nestled in the rolling hills of western Pennsylvania, wasn't exactly welcoming to outsiders. Jack had chosen it for the affordability of its neglected properties and its distance from the noise and chaos of city life that still triggered his hypervigilance. What he hadn't counted on was the tight-knit community's skepticism toward newcomers, especially ones with ambitious plans to resurrect what locals considered worthless land. Throwing good money after bad, Frank Dawson, the hardware store owner, had muttered loud enough for Jack to hear when he'd been purchasing basic supplies yesterday. That Peterson place hasn't yielded a decent crop in 20 years. Nothing but rocks and bad soil. Jack had pretended not to hear, focusing instead on the list of materials he needed for basic repairs. His grandfather had taught him young that responding to naysayers only gave their words power. Instead, he'd paid for his supplies with quiet dignity, nodding politely to the cashier, who'd at least had the decency to look embarrassed by her boss's comments. Now standing on his own land, a concept that still felt surreal after years of military housing and rented apartments, Jack took a deep breath of the morning air, rich with the scent of earth and possibilities. His military training had instilled in him a methodical approach to problem-solving. Assess the situation, identify priorities, execute with precision. The farmhouse needed immediate attention if it was to be habitable before winter. The barn could wait, though he'd need to salvage what he could from its weathered boards. The fields would require extensive work to become productive again, but that was a longer-term project. Jack's trained eye didn't see the same worthless property the locals did. Where they saw overgrowth, he recognized native plants that suggested good soil beneath. Where they saw dilapidation, he saw solid structural bones that had withstood decades of neglect. Most importantly, where they saw failure, he envisioned possibility. The distant sound of an approaching vehicle drew Jack's attention. A dust cloud preceded an aging pickup truck that pulled alongside his property, its engine coughing to a stop. Eleanor Ellie Chen, the town's librarian, and one of the few residents who'd shown him any kindness stepped out with a thermos and what appeared to be a small basket. "Thought you might need breakfast," she called, making her way toward him. "Anyone taking on the Peterson place deserves at least a decent meal to start the day." Jack smiled, appreciating the gesture more than she likely realized. At 50-something, with silver-streaked black hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, Ellie had been a surprise ally. When he'd visited the town library researching the history of local agriculture, she'd provided him with resources and practical advice, instead of the dismissive skepticism he'd encountered elsewhere. "You're going to need more than coffee to face that house," she said, handing him the thermos and unveiling homemade biscuits and fruit from the basket. "Thank you," Jack said, accepting the offering. "Though I've seen worse accommodations in my time." Ellie studied him with shrewd eyes. "Town's been talking about you, you know. Not many people move to Riverbrook these days, especially not to buy the properties others have written off." "I've never put much stock in what's popular," Jack replied mildly. "Only what's possible." "Smart man," Ellie nodded approvingly. Peterson wasn't always the laughingstock of local farmers. His father actually did well with this land back in the 60s. Different methods back then, worked with the land instead of against it. Jack's interest piqued. Any records of what they grew, what worked? "As a matter of fact," Ellie reached into her truck and pulled out a folder, "I found some old agricultural reports from the county extension office. Thought they might be useful." This small act of kindness, practical, unsentimental, exactly what he needed, meant more to Jack than any hollow thanks for your service platitudes he'd endured since returning to civilian life. He accepted the folder with genuine gratitude. As Ellie prepared to leave, she hesitated. "Most folks around here are decent people, Jack. They've just seen too many failures and not enough successes. Show them results, and their tune will change." After she departed, Jack returned his attention to the immediate task at hand, making the farmhouse habitable. His personal belongings remained mostly in storage. He'd been living out of duffel bags for so long that the concept of unpacking felt almost foreign. His temporary home was a small tent pitched near the house, a comfortable arrangement for someone who'd spent years sleeping in far worse conditions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The farmhouse, a two-story structure built in the 1930s, had been abandoned for nearly a decade. The previous owner, Harold Peterson, had died without heirs, and the property had languished in legal limbo until the county finally put it up for auction. Jack had purchased it for a fraction of what comparable acreage would cost closer to any major city, using most of his savings and a small loan secured through a veterans program. As he approached the porch, the weathered boards creaked beneath his weight. The front door, swollen from years of humidity, required a firm shoulder to budge. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight that filtered through dirty windows. The layout was simple, a central hallway with living spaces to one side, kitchen and dining to the other, bedrooms upstairs. Despite the neglect, the house had character, solid craftsmanship from an era when things were built to last. Jack had always possessed a talent for seeing beyond present conditions to future potential. It was what had made him an effective squad leader, the ability to assess his men's strengths beyond their current capabilities. This house, like his land, had good bones. The foundation was solid, the roof mostly intact, save for one corner that would need immediate attention. The ticey, peeling wallpaper, warped floorboards and outdated fixtures were cosmetic issues that time and effort could address. He spent the morning making methodical notes, prioritizing repairs, roof first, then plumbing, electrical, structural issues, windows, insulation. The work would take months, but he had time. His military pension, modest though it was, provided basic sustenance, and his savings would cover materials if he did most of the labor himself. By midday, Jack had created a comprehensive assessment of the house. He took a break to examine the folder Ellie had provided, spreading the documents on the hood of his truck. The agricultural reports detailed soil compositions, successful crop, rotations, and rainfall patterns from decades past. Of particular interest was a hand-drawn map from the 1950s, showing the property divided into sections with notes about what had thrived in each area. One section, marked in the northwestern corner of the property, caught his attention. Annotations indicated it had been deliberately left uncultivated, with a cryptic note, "Historic Site, Peterson Agreement." Jack studied his own modern survey map, noting that this area now appeared overgrown with dense thickets and a few larger trees, a small wooded section he had yet to explore thoroughly. Curious, Jack decided to investigate this section before returning to his house repairs. He gathered basic tools, a machete for undergrowth, his multi-tool, a canteen of water, and his walking stick, and set off across the fields. The late summer heat had dried the tall grasses, which crunched beneath his boots as he methodically made his way toward the northwestern corner. The going became more difficult as he approached the thicket. Wild blackberry bushes formed natural barriers, their thorns catching on his clothing. Jack moved carefully, using the machete to clear a path while disturbing as little as possible. His military training had taught him respect for unknown terrain. After 20 minutes of careful progress, the thicket gave way to a small clearing, dominated by a massive oak tree that must have been centuries old. Its sprawling branches created a natural canopy, and its roots had disrupted the ground in several places, creating uneven mounds and depressions in the earth. At the base of the tree, partially obscured by fallen leaves and decades of natural debris, was what appeared to be a stack of stones, too uniform to be natural. Jack approached cautiously. His interest piqued. Using his walking stick, he gently brushed away layers of decomposed leaves. The stones formed a rough circle about 6 feet in diameter. In the center, one larger, flat stone bore weathered markings that had clearly been carved by human hands. Kneeling despite the protest from his injured leg, Jack carefully cleared more debris. The carvings appeared to be a combination of symbols and what might have been early alphabet characters, though unlike any language he recognized immediately. His years deployed to various global regions had exposed him to numerous cultures and ancient sites, enough to recognize that this was potentially significant. "What were you hiding out here, Peterson?" Jack murmured, continuing to clear the area around the stone circle. As he worked, his walking stick dislodged something at the edge of the circle, a piece of metal that gleamed dully in a shaft of sunlight breaking through the canopy. Setting aside his tools, Jack carefully extracted the object from the soil. It was a medallion of some sort, roughly the size of his palm, made of what appeared to be bronze or copper with a distinctive green patina of great age. Despite centuries in the ground, the relief design remained visible, a central figure surrounded by symbols similar to those on the stone. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, with details that spoke of advanced metallurgic techniques. Jack turned the medallion over carefully. The reverse side bore different markings, what appeared to be a map or celestial chart with a central point marked by an inlaid stone that caught the light with unexpected brilliance. His first thought was that it might be quartz or some common crystal, but the way it refracted light suggested something more valuable. Years in the military had taught Jack the importance of preserving evidence and respecting historical finds. While his curiosity burned, he knew better than to clean or attempt to restore the medallion himself. Instead, he carefully wrapped it in his handkerchief and secured it in his breast pocket. The discovery raised countless questions. How old was this artifact? Who had created it? Why was it here in a deliberately preserved section of farmland in western Pennsylvania? The historical implications could be significant, potentially relating to pre-colonial Native American cultures or even earlier inhabitants. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Jack made his way back to the farmhouse, mind racing with possibilities. He would need expert opinion on the medallion, but approaching the right authorities required careful consideration. His military experience had left him justifiably wary of bureaucracy and institutional claims that could quickly spiral beyond his control. That evening, as Jack sat on the porch steps eating a simple meal of beans and rice cooked on his camping stove, headlights appeared on the long driveway leading to his property. The same distinctive pickup truck from that morning came into view, and he nodded in greeting as Ellie emerged. "Thought you might like some real dinner," she called, holding up a covered dish. "And I brought those books on local history I mentioned." Jack welcomed her company, appreciating both the home-cooked meal, a savory stew that reminded him of comforts long forgotten, and her straightforward manner. As they ate, he debated whether to mention his discovery. Though Ellie had proven herself a rare ally, years of caution weren't easily set aside. "You look like a man with something on his mind," Ellie observed, setting aside her empty bowl. "Find something interesting in those old agricultural reports." Jack studied her for a moment, weighing trust against prudence. "Actually, I did some exploring of the northwestern section. There's a stone formation there under the old oak." Ellie's expression shifted to one of genuine interest. "Peterson's grandfather used to talk about some kind of old site on the property. Local legend says the area was considered special by the indigenous people who lived here before European settlement. Most folks wrote it off as an old man's tales." "What kind of special?" Jack asked. "Sacred ground, supposedly, a place where important ceremonies were conducted." She shrugged. "The Historical Society tried to investigate years ago, but Harold Peterson was fiercely protective of that section, wouldn't let anyone near it, said his family had promised to protect it." Jack nodded slowly. "Decision made. I found something there today." He carefully withdrew the wrapped medallion from his pocket and, using the edge of his napkin, unveiled it between them. Ellie's sharp intake of breath confirmed the find's significance. "That's extraordinary," she whispered, leaning closer but careful not to touch it. "This could be pre-colonial, maybe even older." "I thought the same," Jack agreed. "The craftsmanship is too sophisticated for primitive tools. The inlay work alone suggests advanced techniques." "You know something about artifacts?" Ellie asked, her estimation of him clearly rising. Jack smiled slightly. 3 tours in the Middle East and 1 in Southeast Asia. You develop an eye for distinguishing between ordinary objects and those with historical significance." helped local authorities identify looted antiquities more than once. "This needs expert attention," Ellie said decisively. "The university in Pittsburgh has an excellent archaeology department. I know one of the professors there. Studied with her years ago before I chose library science instead of archaeology." "I'd appreciate an introduction," Jack said carefully, rewrapping the medallion. "But I want to be clear. This was found on my property, in a site that the Peterson family apparently protected for generations. I intend to honor that legacy, not see it exploited." Ellie nodded approvingly. "I'll call Dr. Rebecca Torres tomorrow. She's discreet and principled, won't sensationalize this before understanding its true significance." As Ellie departed, with promises to arrange a meeting, Jack couldn't help but reflect on how quickly life could change direction. He'd purchased this property seeking peace and purpose after years of military service. Instead, he might have stumbled upon a historical discovery of significant importance, one that would undoubtedly complicate his simple plans for a quiet farming life. The following morning brought Riverbrook's small-town grapevine into full effect. Jack had barely begun work on clearing debris from the farmhouse when the first visitors arrived, curious neighbors, ostensibly welcoming him, but transparently more interested in sizing up the newcomer who'd foolishly purchased the Peterson property. "Heard you're planning to farm this rock pile," said a heavy-set man who introduced himself as George Harmon, owner of the feed store. His tone made clear his assessment of such ambitions. "My daddy used to say trying to grow anything on Peterson land was like trying to squeeze blood from a stone." "Appreciate the insight," Jack replied neutrally, continuing to load rotted drywall into a wheelbarrow. "Town's taking bets on how long you'll last," offered another visitor, Harold Wilson, who ran the local insurance agency. No offense meant, of course, just that we've seen city folks come with big dreams before. "I'm not from the city," Jack corrected mildly. "And I don't have big dreams, just practical plans." The visitors exchanged knowing glances that spoke volumes about their skepticism. Jack recognized the pattern. He'd encountered similar attitudes in various forms throughout his life. People were quick to dismiss what they didn't understand or what contradicted their established worldview. Rather than waste energy challenging their assumptions, he simply continued his work, answering direct questions politely, but volunteering. Nothing extra. By midday, the parade of curious onlookers had slowed, and Jack was able to focus on removing the damaged sections of roof. The physical labor was therapeutic, allowing his mind to process the implications of yesterday's discovery. The medallion, carefully secured in a lockbox in his truck, represented more than just a historical artifact. It was a responsibility, one he intended to handle with appropriate care. As he worked, Jack caught occasional glimpses of vehicles, slowing as they passed his property. Riverbrook residents conducting their own surveillance of the newcomer's activities. The attention might have bothered someone else, but years in high-stress combat situations had given Jack perspective on what truly constituted a problem. Let them watch. His actions would speak for themselves over time. Late afternoon brought Ellie's truck once again. This time, she was accompanied by a woman whose practical field clothes and alert, assessing gaze marked her as someone who spent considerable time at archaeological sites. "Jack," Ellie called, waving him down from the roof. "This is Dr. Rebecca Torres from the University of Pittsburgh." Jack descended the ladder carefully, mindful of his leg, and extended a hand. "Sergeant Jack Mercer, retired. Thank you for coming all this way." Dr. Torres's handshake was firm, professional. "When Ellie described your find, I rearranged my schedule. If it's what she suggests, it could be significant to our understanding of pre-colonial cultures in this region." Her directness was refreshing. No pretense, no unnecessary social niceties, just focused academic interest. Jack led them to his truck, retrieving the lockbox containing the medallion. "I've kept it exactly as I found it," he explained, carefully opening the box. "Didn't attempt cleaning or restoration." Dr. Torres donned a pair of latex gloves before gently lifting the wrapped bundle. Her expression remained professionally neutral as she unveiled the medallion, but Jack noted the momentary widening of her eyes. "This is extraordinary," she breathed, echoing Ellie's initial reaction. "The metallurgic technique alone suggests origins inconsistent with what we know of pre-colonial cultures in this region. The symbolic language appears to combine elements I've seen in disparate cultural contexts." "Can you date it?" Jack asked. "Not without proper laboratory analysis," Dr. Torres replied, studying the artifact with evident fascination. "But based on initial observation, I would estimate it's at least several centuries old, possibly much older. The preservation is remarkable." "Jack found it at the stone circle in the northwest corner," Ellie explained. Dr. Torres looked up sharply. "There's a stone circle on the property? That information significantly changes the context. Would you be willing to show me?" Jack considered briefly. "On one condition, this remains confidential until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. The Peterson family protected that site for generations. I intend to continue that stewardship." Dr. Torres nodded. "I respect that approach. Any serious archaeologist would prioritize proper contextual understanding over hasty announcements. I can examine the site and provide preliminary observations without initiating any formal academic process." The agreement made, Jack led them across his property toward the northwestern thicket. The journey was slower with companions, particularly as Dr. Torres stopped frequently to note various aspects of the landscape. Subtle terracing that might have been intentional, arrangements of stones that seemed too regular for natural placement. "This entire area could have been purposefully designed," she observed. "Many ancient sites were integrated with natural features in ways that aren't immediately obvious to modern observers." When they reached the stone circle beneath the massive oak, Dr. Torres's professional composure momentarily faltered. This changes everything we thought we knew about pre-colonial settlements in this region," she said, kneeling to examine the central stone with its weathered carvings. For the next hour, Dr. Torres conducted a meticulous preliminary examination of the site, photographing details, taking notes, and occasionally consulting reference materials on her tablet. Jack and Ellie assisted as directed, helping clear additional debris while being careful not to disturb the underlying structures. "Based on what I'm seeing," Dr. Torres finally announced, "this appears to be a ceremonial site of considerable significance. The medallion you found is likely just one element of a larger historical context. The symbols match several found in other locations across North America, but their combination here is unique." "What does that mean in practical terms?" Jack asked. "It means," Dr. Torres said, unable to fully contain her academic excitement, "that this site could potentially rewrite our understanding of pre-colonial cultural exchanges in North America. The sophisticated metallurgy of the medallion suggests trade networks or technological capabilities previously undocumented in this region." She straightened, brushing dirt from her knees. "Mr. Mercer, you have a historically significant archaeological site on your property. Under normal circumstances, I would be initiating paperwork for a formal research permit and assembling a team for proper excavation." "And under these circumstances?" Jack asked, a note of wariness entering his voice. Dr. Torres studied him thoughtfully. "Under these circumstances, I respect that you've taken on the Peterson family's legacy of protection. Before any formal steps are taken, I propose a careful, limited assessment to understand exactly what we're dealing with. No publicity, no academic announcements, just scientific documentation to ensure proper preservation." The proposal seemed reasonable, acknowledging both the historical importance and Jack's rights as the property owner. He nodded slowly. "I can agree to that, provided I'm kept informed every step of the way." "Of course," Dr. Torres confirmed, "and I should warn you, once word gets out, and eventually it will, you'll have more attention than you might want. Historical finds of this potential significance attract both legitimate interest and unfortunate exploitation." As they made their way back toward the farmhouse, the setting sun casting long shadows across the fields, Jack reflected on how dramatically his circumstances had shifted in just 24 hours. He'd purchased this land seeking simplicity and purpose. Instead, he'd become the custodian of what might be a historical treasure, one that would undoubtedly complicate his life in ways he couldn't yet fully anticipate. The following days brought a carefully coordinated preliminary assessment of the site. Dr. Torres, true to her word, brought only 2 trusted colleagues, a specialist in ancient metallurgy and an anthropologist focused on indigenous cultures of the region. Their work was methodical and respectful, documenting without disturbing, analyzing without removing. Jack continued his own work on the farmhouse, making steady progress on the roof repairs and structural reinforcements. The rhythm of physical labor provided necessary balance to the growing complexities surrounding the archaeological discovery. He found himself gradually settling into a new routine, mornings spent on house repairs, afternoons observing and occasionally assisting the archaeological team, evenings processing the day's developments. Ellie continued to be a valuable ally, bringing historical records from the town archives that provided fragments of context about the Peterson family's long history of protecting the northwestern corner of their property. One journal entry from the 1870s mentioned an agreement between Jeremiah Peterson and a representative of the Seneca people, promising that the sacred circle would remain undisturbed for as long as Petersons owned the land. A week into the preliminary assessment, Dr. Torres requested a meeting with Jack. They sat on the newly repaired front porch, the evening air cool against their skin. "The initial findings exceed even my most optimistic expectations," she began, her professional tone belied by the excitement in her eyes. "The medallion alone represents a previously undocumented style of metallurgic art, combining techniques we typically associate with disparate cultures. The site itself shows evidence of continuous ceremonial use over potentially thousands of years." Jack nodded, processing this information. "What happens next?" "That's why I wanted to speak with you directly," Dr. Torres replied. "In a typical situation, these findings would warrant immediate application for formal excavation permits, academic publications, and likely national historical designation." "But you're suggesting we consider alternatives," Jack observed. "Yes, The historical significance is undeniable, but how we proceed matters tremendously. I've seen too many important sites damaged by hasty exposure or institutional battles over control. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The proper study of this site could take years and should involve consultation with indigenous representatives whose ancestral connections may be directly relevant. Jack appreciated her thoughtful approach. I purchased this land for a specific purpose, to build something meaningful after years of military service. I'm not interested in having my property turned into a tourist attraction or an institutional battleground. That's exactly my concern, Dr. Torres agreed. Once formal announcements are made, the process takes on a momentum of its own. Multiple museums and institutions would stake claims to study rights. Federal and state historical preservation authorities would become involved. Your property rights wouldn't disappear, but they would become significantly complicated. The conversation continued as darkness fell, exploring various approaches to honoring both the historical significance of the discovery and Jack's vision for his property. By the time Dr. Torres departed, they had outlined a provisional plan, continue limited, documented research while exploring partnership options with indigenous cultural preservation organizations and select academic institutions that had demonstrated respect for both historical and contemporary stakeholders. As Jack prepared for sleep in his tent beside the partially restored farmhouse, he reflected on the unexpected path his life had taken. The mocking assessments of Riverbrook's residents that he was wasting his money on worthless land now carried a layer of irony neither they nor he could have anticipated. The true value of his property had nothing to do with agricultural potential and everything to do with historical significance that had been hiding in plain sight for generations. Word spread through Riverbrook like wildfire. Within days of Dr. Torres's initial visit, Jack noticed increased traffic on the quiet country road bordering his property. Vehicles would slow as they passed, occupants craning their necks for a glimpse of the farmland that had suddenly become the focus of local gossip. Some didn't even bother with subtlety, parking along the roadside and openly staring as Jack continued his work on the dilapidated farmhouse. "Heard you found something odd on that worthless land," Frank Dawson called out one morning, leaning against his truck at the end of Jack's driveway. The hardware store owner's tone carried a mixture of skepticism and newfound interest. "Some kind of Indian trinket?" Jack paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just focusing on making this place livable before winter," he replied, evenly, neither confirming nor denying the rumors. "University folks don't drive all the way from Pittsburgh for house repairs," Frank pressed, his casual tone belied by the sharp curiosity in his eyes. "Town saying you stumbled on something valuable. That why you bought this rock pile? Already knew what was buried here?" The accusation was clear, and it sparked a flare of anger that Jack quickly contained. His years in combat zones had taught him that emotional reactions rarely improved difficult situations. Instead, he set down his tools and approached the property line, his gait measured despite his slight limp. "Mr. Dawson," he said calmly, "I bought this land because I saw potential where others saw failure. Same reason I joined the Marines instead, of following paths others thought more sensible. If you'd like to discuss building materials for my repairs, I'm happy to visit your store. Otherwise, I've got work to continue." The directness of his response seemed to catch Frank off guard. The older man straightened, clearly reassessing the quiet veteran he'd previously dismissed. Just friendly interest in a neighbor's good. "Fortune," he muttered defensively. "Appreciate the concern," Jack replied, already turning back to his work. "Have a good day." This exchange became the first of many. As days passed, the nature of Riverbrook's interest evolved from dismissive mockery to intense curiosity. The same townspeople who had taken bets on how quickly the city boy would fail now invented reasons to pass by his property, often slowing, to study the northwestern corner where Dr. Torres and her small team continued their careful documentation. Jack maintained his focus on the farmhouse restoration, creating a buffer of normalcy around the extraordinary circumstances developing on his land. The roof was now fully repaired, the structural issues addressed, and the interior demolition complete. He'd begun the painstaking process of updating plumbing and electrical systems, working methodically from knowledge gained through military engineering training and supplemented by reference materials. 2 weeks after the initial discovery, Jack returned from a supply run to find an unfamiliar luxury SUV parked in his driveway. A man in an expensive suit stood near the vehicle, studying the property with the calculating gaze of someone assessing a value rather than appreciating character. "Mr. Mercer," the man called as Jack parked his truck. "Maxwell Harrington, Director of Acquisitions for the Eastern States Historical Foundation. Do you have a moment to discuss your recent discovery?" Jack assessed the visitor with the careful neutrality he'd perfected during intelligence debriefings. "Wasn't aware I'd made any announcements about discoveries," he replied, retrieving his purchases from the truck bed. Harrington offered a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Word travels in academic circles, especially regarding findings of potential historical significance. Dr. Torres is well respected, and her interest in your property has not gone unnoticed." The implication was clear. Whatever confidentiality they had hoped to maintain had already been compromised. Jack set down his supplies on the porch, buying a moment to consider his response. "Mr. Harrington, I'm in the middle of essential repairs to make this place habitable before winter sets in. If you'd like to discuss anything regarding my property, you'll need to schedule a time that's mutually convenient." The dismissal was polite but firm. Harrington's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. However, I should mention that our foundation has considerable resources dedicated to preserving historical artifacts and sites. We could offer substantial compensation for exclusive research rights." The mention of compensation, so early in the conversation and without any confirmation of what had been found, revealed volumes about the man's approach. Jack recognized the tactic from countless negotiations in regions where American military presence was viewed with complex local politics, led with money when respect hasn't been established. "I appreciate your interest," Jack replied, his tone unchanged. "If and when I have anything to announce regarding this property, I'll be sure to make appropriate contacts. For now, I need to return to my work." Harrington produced a business card from an expensive leather case. "When you're ready to discuss terms, please call me directly. Our foundation can move very quickly on acquisitions of significance." After the unwelcome visitor departed, Jack contacted Dr. Torres immediately. Her reaction confirmed his suspicions. "This is exactly what I was concerned about," she sighed. "Academic networks can be porous, especially with discoveries of potential significance. Harrington's foundation is known for aggressive acquisition tactics. They secure research rights, then strictly control access, often prioritizing prestige over collaborative scholarship. He mentioned compensation, Jack noted, seemed eager to establish a financial framework before even confirming what was found. Classic approach, Dr. Torres agreed. They identify potentially significant sites, secure control through financial arrangements with property owners, then dictate terms to the academic community. I'd advise extreme caution. The incident marked a turning point. What had begun as a private discovery was clearly becoming public knowledge in circles that mattered. Over the next few days, Jack received 3 more unexpected visitors: a representative from the State Historical Society, an attorney claiming to represent interested institutional clients, and a journalist from a regional newspaper who'd somehow heard rumors of significant pre-colonial artifacts. Jack maintained the same measured response to each. No confirmation of specific discoveries, no commitment to future arrangements, and a clear boundary around his property rights. His military training in information security served him well, as did his experience navigating complex intercultural situations where multiple agendas operated simultaneously. A week after Harrington's visit, Jack was working on interior framing when he heard the sound of vehicles approaching, multiple vehicles, from the varied engine notes. Moving to the front porch, he observed a concerning development. 3 news vans had parked along the road bordering his property, and reporters with cameras were already setting up equipment. Before he could react, another vehicle approached. Ellie's familiar truck, driving faster than usual. She pulled into his driveway with an expression that mixed anger and concern. "You've seen them?" she asked, gesturing toward the news crews. Jack nodded. "Just noticed. Any idea what triggered this level of interest?" "The Historical Foundation issued a press release this morning," Ellie explained, her voice tight with indignation. "They didn't specifically name your property, but they announced the discovery of historically significant artifacts in Riverbrook County that may redefine our understanding of pre-colonial cultures. Are enough details for anyone paying attention to connect the dots?" The tactical implications were immediately clear to Jack. Harrington's foundation was attempting to create public pressure through media attention, likely hoping to force Jack's hand in negotiations. It was a sophisticated maneuver that leveraged modern media against his desire for privacy. "Dr. Torres is furious," Ellie continued. "She's driving in from Pittsburgh now. This kind of premature publicity can be devastating to proper archaeological process." As they spoke, 2 of the news crews had become bolder, crossing onto the edge of Jack's property with cameras rolling. One reporter, a young woman in a sharply tailored suit, was already delivering what appeared to be an introduction, gesturing toward the farmhouse and the distant northwestern corner where the stone circle lay hidden in thickets. "They're trespassing," Jack observed calmly, years of crisis management keeping his tone measured despite his growing anger. "Want me to call Sheriff Wilson?" Ellie offered. "He's not always the sharpest, but he's fair about property rights." Jack considered briefly, weighing options with the same methodical assessment he'd applied to combat situations. "Not yet. Direct confrontation might escalate media interest. Let me try something else first." He returned to his truck, retrieving a digital camera he used to document his renovation progress. With deliberate calmness, he began photographing each news crew, making sure to capture clear images of faces, vehicle license plates, and network identifications. The effect was almost immediate. The reporters, accustomed to being on the other side of the lens, began to look uncomfortable. Jack approached the closest crew, his walking stick making soft impressions in the earth as he crossed his field. The reporter, seeing him approach, brightened with anticipated opportunity. "Mr. Mercer, Alexis Chen from Channel 7 News. Can you confirm reports that you've discovered ancient artifacts of historical significance on your property?" Instead of answering, Jack continued photographing their equipment and vehicle. "You're currently trespassing on private property," he stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded combat units. "I'm documenting this violation before contacting law enforcement and your network's legal department." The reporter's expression faltered. "We're simply covering a story of public interest." "You're standing on private property without permission," Jack interrupted calmly. "That's trespassing under Pennsylvania law. Any story you're pursuing can be conducted from public access areas, which my property is not." The calculated response, firm but not aggressive, informed but not emotional, had the desired effect. Within minutes, all three crews had retreated to the public roadway, still filming but no longer encroaching on his land. It was a temporary solution at best, but it provided breathing room until Dr. Torres arrived. The archaeologist appeared an hour later, her usually composed demeanor showing signs of strain. "This is completely unprofessional," she fumed after Jack briefed her on the morning's events. "The Foundation has no right to make announcements about findings they haven't even confirmed." "They're creating leverage," Jack observed, "generating public interest to pressure discussions about access and rights." Dr. Torres nodded grimly. "Classic institutional tactics. They know that significant historical discoveries often lead to complex negotiations between property owners, academic institutions, governmental authorities, and indigenous representatives. By creating premature public awareness, they're attempting to force accelerated decision-making. "Which benefits them how?" Jack asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Established institutions with ready resources can move quickly to secure favorable positions, while smaller organizations and indigenous groups are still mobilizing responses," Dr. Torres explained. "It's a power play, pure and simple." The situation deteriorated further that afternoon when 3 cars carrying representatives from different indigenous nations arrived, having seen the news reports. Unlike the aggressive reporters or the calculating Harrington, these visitors approached with appropriate respect, requesting permission before entering Jack's property. Their concerns, however, were profound. "Our ancestral connections to this region date back thousands of years," explained Joseph Running Bear, an elder from one of the nations. "If ceremonial items have been discovered, they may have deep spiritual significance to our people. We've had too many experiences with such items being treated as mere curiosities by museums and collectors." Jack listened carefully, recognizing the legitimacy of their concerns. His military service had taught him that respecting cultural contexts was not merely courteous, but often essential to achieving just outcomes. He arranged for these representatives to meet with Dr. Torres, facilitating a preliminary discussion about collaborative approaches to studying whatever the site might reveal while honoring its cultural significance. By evening, Jack's phone was ringing constantly with calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Reporters, institutional representatives, curious locals. He finally turned it off, preferring the quiet as he sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The beauty of the land, his land, remained unchanged despite the day's chaos. Dr. Torres joined him, having concluded her discussions with the indigenous representatives. "You're handling this with remarkable composure," she observed. "Most property owners would be overwhelmed." Jack smiled slightly. Spent years managing complex situations where different groups had competing objectives and limited trust. Compared to mediating between tribal leaders in Afghanistan's Helmand province, this is straightforward. "I suppose that's one way to look at it," Dr. Torres replied, a hint of dry humor breaking through her professional demeanor, "though I doubt you had to deal with museum acquisition departments in Afghanistan." "Different context, similar dynamics," Jack noted. "Resource control, historical narratives, power imbalances, cultural significance versus institutional interests." The archaeologist studied him with newfound appreciation. "You're not what most people would expect from a retired Marine." "Most Marines aren't what people expect," Jack replied simply. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles, more than one, judging by the varied engine notes. Jack suppressed a sigh, wearying of the constant intrusions. "Looks like we have more visitors," Dr. Torres observed, rising from her chair. 4 vehicles pulled into the long driveway, 2 official-looking SUVs with government plates, a luxury sedan, and a 4th vehicle that Jack recognized from that morning Maxwell Harrington's distinctive Range Rover. The coordinated arrival suggested planning rather than coincidence. "This doesn't look like a social call," Jack observed quietly. "No," Dr. Torres agreed, her expression concerned. "This looks like institutional pressure consolidating." The visitors emerged from their vehicles with the confidence of those accustomed to authority. From the government SUVs came representatives of the State Historical Preservation Office and the Federal Bureau of Land Management. The luxury sedan delivered a distinguished-looking man who introduced himself as Dr. William Forrester, director of the National Museum of Indigenous Cultures. Harrington completed the delegation, his expression suggesting he considered himself the orchestrator of this gathering. "Mr. Mercer," Harrington began with practiced cordiality, "we apologize for the unannounced visit, but developments have accelerated considerably since our previous conversation." "So I've noticed," Jack replied neutrally, remaining seated on his porch rather than descending to meet the group. A subtle power dynamic he'd learned through countless negotiations in foreign territories. The government representatives stepped forward, introducing themselves with official credentials. "Mr. Mercer," the state official began, "we understand you've discovered artifacts of potential historical significance. There are established protocols for such findings." "Indeed there are," Dr. Torres interjected, her academic authority evident in her tone, "including respect for ongoing research integrity and proper cultural consultation, both of which have been compromised by premature public announcements." The pointed comment was clearly directed at Harrington, who maintained his smooth composure. "The public has a right to knowledge about significant historical discoveries," he countered, "particularly when they may reshape our understanding of this region's pre-colonial history. The public's right to information doesn't supersede property rights or research integrity," Jack observed calmly. "Nor does it justify trespassing by news crews or premature announcements of unconfirmed findings." The museum director, Forrester, stepped forward with the practiced diplomacy of an institutional veteran. Mr. Mercer, we all share a common goal, ensuring that historically significant artifacts are properly preserved and studied. The National Museum has unparalleled resources for conservation, research, and public education, as does the Eastern States Historical Foundation, Harrington added quickly, unwilling to cede positioning to a potential institutional rival. Jack observed the subtle competition between the representatives, recognizing the familiar dynamics of territorial positioning. The federal official, sensing the tension, attempted to redirect the conversation. Mr. Mercer, while you own this property, discoveries of national historical significance create certain obligations under federal preservation statutes. We're here to ensure compliance with those legal frameworks. The implied threat was clear, though carefully phrased. Jack had encountered similar tactics during provincial negotiations in his military service, the suggestion of regulatory force as a prelude to cooperative agreements. I'm familiar with the relevant statutes, Jack replied, surprising the officials, including the provisions regarding private property rights, the burden of proof required to establish national significance, and the procedural requirements before any federal intervention. The officials exchanged glances, clearly reassessing their approach to the unassuming veteran. Dr. Torres suppressed a smile, appreciating Jack's informed response. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside," Harrington suggested, looking meaningfully at the news vans still parked along the distant roadway. "My house is currently under renovation," Jack replied, gesturing to the partially completed interior visible through the doorway. "And I haven't confirmed or authorized any official assessment of discoveries on my property. The only authorized presence has been Dr. Torres's preliminary documentation team, operating under strict confidentiality agreements, which someone has clearly violated," Dr. Torres added pointedly. Harrington's expression tightened momentarily before he recovered. His professional demeanor, information about significant discoveries naturally generates interest. We're simply offering a structured approach to managing what will inevitably become a complex situation. Jack rose from his chair, his full height and military bearing suddenly more evident. Despite his simple work clothes and the slight limp from his combat injury, there was an unmistakable authority in his posture, the quiet confidence of someone who had faced far more intimidating situations than a group of institutional representatives. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "I purchased this property for a specific purpose, to build something meaningful after years of military service. Any historical findings will be approached with appropriate respect for their cultural significance, academic integrity, and legal frameworks. But those discussions will happen on my timeline, not one manufactured through media pressure or institutional convenience." The federal official started to object, but Jack continued with the same measured tone. "I understand the various interests represented here, and I respect the legitimate concerns about historical preservation. I've already initiated appropriate consultation with indigenous representatives and qualified academic researchers. When there are confirmed findings ready for broader discussion, I'll make proper notifications." "And in the meantime," Harrington pressed, clearly frustrated by Jack's composed resistance. "In the meantime," Jack replied simply, "this remains private property, and I'll continue my renovation work without interference. Dr. Torres's team will continue their preliminary documentation under our existing confidentiality agreement. Any Trespassing by media, institutional representatives, or curious locals will be addressed through appropriate legal channels. The officials recognized the gentle but firm dismissal. They exchanged business cards, made professional but pointed requests for future meetings, and eventually departed, their coordinated arrival having failed to achieve the immediate access they'd clearly hoped to secure. As the vehicles disappeared down the long driveway, Dr. Torres turned to Jack with newfound respect. "That was impressively handled. Most property owners would have been intimidated into immediate concessions." Jack shrugged slightly. "Pressure tactics only work when you don't recognize them for what they are. After years of negotiations where the stakes were measured in lives rather than artifacts, institutional maneuvering seems relatively straightforward." As darkness settled over the farm, Jack reflected on how dramatically his circumstances had shifted. The property that Riverbrook's residents had mockingly dismissed as worthless was now the focus of intense interest from powerful institutions. The quiet retirement he'd imagined, farming the land, rebuilding the house, finding peace after years of military service, had been abruptly transformed into something far more complex. Yet there was an unexpected resonance to the situation. Throughout his military career, Jack had often found himself positioned between competing interests, tasked with finding pathways that respected multiple perspectives while maintaining core principles. Now, as the custodian of potentially significant historical artifacts, he faced a similar challenge in an entirely different context. The medallion that had started this chain of events remained secured in a safety deposit box in the nearby town's bank, its historical significance still being carefully documented. But its impact had already rippled outward, creating waves that would fundamentally reshape Jack's relationship to his new home and community. As he prepared for sleep in his tent beside the partially renovated farmhouse, Jack realized that the land he'd purchased had offered him something unexpected. Not just a place to build a new life after military service, but a purpose that drew on the skills and principles that had defined his previous career. The path forward would require careful navigation of competing interests, respect for cultural significance, and steadfast protection of what mattered most. The challenge ahead was not what he'd anticipated when purchasing the worthless Peterson farm, but Jack Mercer had never been one to retreat from meaningful challenges. The following morning brought an unexpected silence to the Peterson farm. The news vans that had maintained their vigilant watch from the roadside were conspicuously absent. The procession of curious locals driving slowly past had ceased. Even the birds seemed to sing with particular enthusiasm in the relative peace that had descended. Jack emerged from his tent as dawn broke, appreciating the quiet as he performed his morning routine. The same disciplined sequence of stretches and exercises that had sustained him through military deployments. His injured leg protested less than usual, responding to the consistent rehabilitation he maintained despite the chaos of recent weeks. As he prepared a simple breakfast on his camping stove, Jack surveyed his property with renewed perspective. The farmhouse renovation had progressed significantly despite the archaeological discovery and subsequent disruptions. The structure was now weather-tight, with new windows installed and interior framing complete. He'd begun the painstaking process of updating electrical systems, working methodically from the service panel outward. The emerging home reflected his character, unpretentious but solidly built, designed for function rather than display. The morning calm was interrupted by the arrival of Ellie's truck, dust rising behind it as she navigated the long driveway. With unusual speed, her expression as she emerged suggested urgent news. "You haven't seen it yet?" she asked without preamble, holding up a folded newspaper. "Haven't seen what?" Jack replied, pouring an extra cup of coffee from his thermos. Ellie unfolded the newspaper, the Riverbrook County Chronicle, to reveal a front-page headline. "Museums battle over ancient treasure. Multi-million-dollar bidding war erupts over veterans' discovery." Jack accepted the paper with a measured calmness that belied his internal reaction. The article detailed an alleged high-stakes competition between major museums for exclusive rights to ancient artifacts of extraordinary value discovered on his property. It quoted anonymous sources close to negotiations, claiming that offers exceeding $20 million had already been presented. "It's complete fabrication," Jack stated, scanning the sensationalized text. "There have been no negotiations, no offers, and certainly no bidding war." "That's what I thought," Ellie confirmed. "But it explains why the news vans disappeared. They're chasing this story instead, probably trying to confirm details with the museums mentioned." Jack folded the paper deliberately, his mind already analyzing the tactical implications. "This changes the dynamic considerably. Creating a perception of commercial value shifts public understanding from historical significance to financial opportunity." Ellie nodded. "Classic misdirection. Riverbrook is already buzzing with speculation about how much your treasure might be worth. Frank Dawson was telling everyone at the diner this morning that you're about to become the richest man in the county." The manufactured narrative presented new challenges. Jack had extensive experience managing complex situations, but he'd always operated within frameworks of direct military or diplomatic authority. This battle was being waged through public perception and media manipulation, terrain where his experienced adversaries clearly felt comfortable. "What's your next move?" Ellie asked, respecting Jack's thoughtful silence. Before he could answer, his phone rang, a number he recognized as Dr. Torres. The archaeologist's usually composed voice carried unmistakable tension. "Have you seen the newspaper?" she asked immediately. "Just now," Jack confirmed. "It's a deliberate strategy," Dr. Torres explained. "By framing the discovery in commercial terms, they're attempting to establish market value as the primary consideration. It undermines both academic protocols and indigenous cultural claims. Creating a bidding war narrative also pressures me to cash in before the supposed value diminishes," Jack observed. "Clever approach." "Too clever," Dr. Torres agreed. "I've already received calls from my department chair asking about million-dollar artifacts and why the university isn't more aggressively involved. The indigenous representatives are facing similar pressures from their communities." As they discussed implications, Jack's military training asserted itself. Assess the situation, identify vulnerabilities, develop counter-strategy. The immediate challenge was information control. The narrative had been hijacked, creating false expectations and misaligned incentives for all parties. "We need to redirect the conversation," Jack decided, "not through denial, which would only fuel speculation, but by establishing a clear, authoritative framework." By mid-morning, Jack had coordinated calls with Dr. Torres, the indigenous representatives, and surprisingly, Sheriff Wilson, whose practical understanding of local dynamics proved unexpectedly valuable. Together, they developed an approach that would leverage each party's strengths while presenting a unified response to the manufactured bidding war narrative. The plan came together with the precision of a military operation. Dr. Torres would provide academic context through her university's official channels. The indigenous representatives would affirm their cultural interests beyond commercial considerations. Sheriff Wilson would address trespassing concerns and public safety, and Jack would provide a statement clarifying his position as the property owner. "It won't stop the speculation entirely," Dr. Torres cautioned during their final coordination call, "but it will establish boundaries around legitimate versus sensationalized information. Sometimes defining the battlefield is half the battle," Jack replied, drawing on lessons learned through years of unconventional warfare. As they implemented their coordinated response, Jack returned to his house renovation, the physical labor providing both practical progress and mental clarity. He was installing electrical outlets in what would become the kitchen when Ellie returned, her expression suggesting a significant development. "You should see this," she said, holding up her tablet. On the screen was a social media post from the Eastern States Historical Foundation, a professionally produced video featuring Maxwell Harrington standing before an elaborate display of artifacts remarkably similar to the medallion Jack had discovered. These ceremonial objects, recently acquired by our foundation, demonstrate the sophisticated metallurgical techniques of pre-colonial cultures in the region, Harrington explained to the camera with practiced authority. They provide important context for evaluating similar discoveries currently being investigated. The implication was masterfully crafted. Without specifically mentioning Jack's find, Harrington was positioning his foundation as already possessing contextual expertise and similar artifacts. It was a sophisticated attempt to establish presumptive authority over any future research or display. "He's building institutional positioning," Jack observed, recognizing the tactic from corporate negotiations he'd witnessed during his final military posting at the Pentagon, creating the perception that his foundation is the natural steward for any related discoveries. "It's working," Ellie confirmed. "The video has thousands of shares already. Local social media is buzzing with speculation that your artifact belongs with Harrington's collection." The escalation continued throughout the day. By afternoon, 2 more museums had issued statements about their long-standing expertise with similar artifacts. A renowned auction house published an analysis suggesting that ceremonial objects from the recently discovered Pennsylvania site could command prices exceeding $30 million if offered for sale. The carefully coordinated response Jack had organized, with Dr. Torres and the others, was being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of speculative content. Each new statement or social media post further reinforced the narrative of a commercial treasure hunt rather than a significant historical discovery. As evening approached, Jack received an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Wilson's patrol car pulled into the driveway, lights off, but moving with official purpose. The sheriff, a weathered man in his late 50s, with the practical demeanor of someone who'd seen it all, approached with a distinct lack of the curiosity that had characterized most recent visitors. "Figured I should deliver this in person," he said without preamble, handing Jack an official-looking envelope. "County just received it. Formal notice of intent to petition for historical designation of your property. Thought you'd want to know before it becomes public." Jack accepted the document, recognizing the legal maneuver for what it was, an attempt to establish external authority over his property through regulatory mechanisms. "Appreciate the courtesy, Sheriff. Seems things are accelerating." The sheriff studied Jack with the assessing gaze of someone accustomed to reading people in tense situations. "County's never dealt with anything like this before. Folks are getting worked up about treasure and museums. Property values in the area are already seeing speculation, and I've got increased traffic creating safety issues on roads not designed. For it. Complicated situation," Jack acknowledged. "Yep." Sheriff Wilson shifted his weight, the practical lawman considering his words carefully. "Thing is, most of the complication seems manufactured. Been sheriff here 15 years. Never seen a situation spiral like this without somebody pushing it." Jack appreciated the sheriff's perceptiveness. "Any thoughts on managing it?" "I deal with facts, not speculation," Wilson replied. "Right now, facts are in short supply, but rumors are multiplying. Might be time to establish some ground truth." The suggestion aligned with Jack's developing strategy. After the sheriff departed, he contacted Dr. Torres to discuss accelerating certain aspects of their approach. The archaeologist agreed readily, recognizing that the situation's dynamics had shifted significantly. "The medallion has been properly documented now," she confirmed. "We can proceed with a limited, factual disclosure that would correct some of the wilder speculations without compromising the site's integrity." By the following morning, Jack had made his decision. Rather than continuing to react to others' manipulations of the narrative, he would establish clear parameters through direct action. The approach drew on his military experience. When operating in environments where information was weaponized, sometimes the most effective countermeasure was unambiguous transparency about specific facts, while maintaining operational security. About broader contexts, he arranged for Dr. Torres to bring the medallion from the bank vault where it had been secured. Together with Ellie, Sheriff Wilson, and 2 representatives from the indigenous nations with historical connections to the region, they prepared for a carefully controlled disclosure. Jack chose the location deliberately, the front porch of his partially renovated farmhouse, with its clear view of both the fields he was preparing to cultivate and the distant northwestern corner where the stone circle remained protected. The setting embodied his dual commitment to build a productive life on this land while respecting its historical significance. Sheriff Wilson had arranged for a single local reporter, Marion Hayes from the Riverbrook County Chronicle, to document the disclosure. Hayes was known for factual reporting rather than sensationalism, making her the appropriate conduit for establishing an authoritative account. As they gathered on the porch, Jack felt a familiar calm descend, the focused clarity he'd experienced before critical missions. Dr. Torres placed a simple wooden box on the small table between them, then stepped back with professional deference to Jack's authority as property owner. "Miss Hayes," Jack began, addressing the reporter directly, "I've invited you here to provide factual context regarding recent discoveries on my property. There has been considerable speculation, much of it inaccurate. I'd like to establish a clear record." The reporter nodded, recording device ready. "I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Mercer." With deliberate movements, Jack opened the wooden box to reveal the medallion, now carefully preserved in an archival container. The artifact's distinctive beauty was undeniable. ancient craftsmanship capturing light with the same brilliance it had likely displayed centuries earlier. This medallion was discovered on my property approximately 3 weeks ago, Jack explained, calmly. Dr. Torres and her team have conducted preliminary analysis, confirming its historical significance while respecting appropriate archaeological protocols. Dr. Torres provided a concise, factual assessment of the artifact's likely age, cultural context, and historical importance, carefully avoiding speculation while establishing its legitimate scholarly value. The indigenous representatives spoke briefly about potential cultural connections, emphasizing respect for ancestral sites rather than ownership claims. Contrary to recent reports, Jack continued, there have been no bidding wars, no offers in the millions, and no negotiations with museums or private collectors. As the property owner, I have not authorized any commercial valuation of this artifact or any others that may exist on the site. The reporter, to her credit, asked thoughtful questions focused on facts rather than sensation. When she inquired about Jack's intentions for the artifact, his response was measured but clear. My primary concern is proper stewardship, he stated. This medallion represents historical and cultural significance that transcends commercial value. Any decisions regarding its future will be made in consultation with qualified archaeologists and representatives of the indigenous nations with ancestral connections to this region. Sheriff Wilson added brief comments about trespassing enforcement and public safety concerns, establishing clear boundaries for those who might be inspired by treasure-hunting fantasies. Throughout the disclosure, Jack maintained the same calm authority that had served him through years of military leadership, direct without aggression, confident without arrogance, principled without rigidity. As the reporter departed with her factual account and authorized photographs, Jack knew the disclosure would alter, but not end the complex dynamics surrounding his discovery. Establishing ground truth was only the first step in reclaiming the narrative that had been hijacked by institutional interests. The article appeared the following day, a front-page feature with the straightforward headline, "Local Veteran Confirms Archaeological Find, Dispels Rumors of Treasure." Hayes had reported the facts without embellishment, including direct quotes that established Jack's principled approach to stewardship. The accompanying photograph showed the medallion in its archival container, its beauty evident but contextualized by the serious expressions of those committed to its proper preservation. The impact was immediate and multifaceted. Local speculation shifted from wild treasure fantasies to more grounded discussions of historical significance. The county commissioners, who had been considering emergency measures to manage treasure hunting traffic, returned to regular business. Most importantly, the institutions that had been maneuvering for advantage found their narratives undermined by straightforward facts. Harrington's reaction was predictably swift. By mid-afternoon, he had arrived at Jack's property unannounced, his luxury SUV raising dust on the long driveway. His expression as he approached suggested barely contained frustration beneath his practiced corporate demeanor. "Mr. Mercer," he began without preamble, "I must express concern about your unilateral disclosure. There are established protocols for announcing significant historical discoveries." Jack continued the wiring installation he'd been working on, replying without looking up. According to Dr. Torres, those protocols involve proper documentation, consultation with relevant cultural stakeholders, and factual disclosure to prevent speculation, all of which were followed. The Eastern States Historical Foundation has unparalleled experience managing discoveries of this nature. Harrington pressed, his tone suggesting authority he didn't actually possess. By acting independently, you've potentially compromised broader research contexts. Jack set down his tools and turned to face the visitor directly. "Mr. Harrington, your foundation issued a press release about my property without authorization, contributed to speculation about bidding wars that never existed, and attempted to establish presumptive authority through misleading social media content. I've simply provided factual context to correct those misrepresentations." The directness of the response momentarily disrupted Harrington's practiced composure. He adjusted his approach, voice softening to suggest reasonable compromise. "Perhaps we've had some miscommunications. The Foundation remains interested in offering substantial compensation for research access. Given your military service, we'd be particularly honored to establish a veterans recognition component to any exhibition." The attempted leverage, appealing to Jack's military identity while maintaining the commercial framing, was transparent. Jack had encountered similar tactics during provincial negotiations in Afghanistan, where local power brokers would invoke respect for specific tribal identities while pursuing purely commercial advantages. "I appreciate the Foundation's interest," Jack replied evenly. "As I've stated publicly, decisions regarding this discovery will prioritize historical accuracy, cultural respect, and proper archaeological protocols. If your foundation wishes to contribute constructively within those parameters, I'm open to considering proposals that align with those priorities." The conditional openness, establishing clear principles while refusing to close dialogue entirely, was a negotiation approach Jack had found effective in complex, cross-cultural situations. It created space for legitimate collaboration while firmly rejecting manipulative tactics. Harrington recognized the skillful response for what it was. His expression shifted to reassessment, the calculating gaze of someone recognizing a more formidable opponent than initially presumed. "You're more experienced in these matters than your background would suggest," he observed, attempting to recalibrate the dynamic. "Experience comes in many forms," Jack replied simply. "Military service teaches effective assessment of competing interests and principled decision-making under pressure." As Harrington departed with promises of revised proposals, Jack returned to his renovation work with renewed focus. The direct confrontation had clarified the situation. Institutional pressure would continue, but he had established clear parameters for engagement. The principles that would guide his stewardship of the discovery were now publicly recognized, creating accountability for all parties involved. That evening, as Jack sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues, he reflected on the unexpected path his life had taken. He had purchased this land seeking simplicity after years of military complexity, yet found himself at the center of competing historical, cultural, and institutional interests. The irony wasn't lost on him. Throughout his military career, Jack had often served as a mediator between local communities, tribal interests, international organizations, and American strategic objectives. Those experiences, navigating complex human dynamics while maintaining core principles, had prepared him for this entirely unexpected challenge. The land that Riverbrook's residents had mockingly dismissed as worthless now carried multiple layers of value, agricultural potential that Jack still intended to realize, historical significance that scholars were eager to document, cultural importance to indigenous nations, and institutional prestige that museums and foundations were actively pursuing. As darkness settled over his fields, Jack felt a growing certainty about his path forward. The medallion and whatever other artifacts might lie beneath his soil weren't merely objects to be displayed or valued in commercial terms. They represented a connection to human history that transcended modern institutional frameworks, a legacy of creativity, spirituality, and cultural expression that deserved protection and respectful understanding. The challenge ahead would require the same qualities that had defined his military service: unwavering integrity, strategic patience, cross-cultural respect, and principled leadership. The worthless farm that had drawn mockery from Riverbrook's residents had given Jack something unexpected, not just a place to build a new life, but a mission worthy of the skills he'd developed through years of service. Tomorrow would bring new institutional maneuvers, fresh media inquiries, and continued pressure from various interests. But tonight, sitting on the porch of the home he was rebuilding with his own hands, Jack Mercer felt the calm certainty of a man who had found his ground and would defend it, not through force, but through the steadfast integrity that had guided him through far more dangerous battlefields. 3 months had transformed the Peterson farm beyond recognition. What had once been an overgrown, neglected property, dismissed by locals as worthless land, now stood as a testament to vision, perseverance, and principled determination. The farmhouse renovation was complete, not with lavish upgrades or ostentatious additions, but with thoughtful restoration that honored the structure's original character while integrating modern systems for efficiency and comfort. Jack stood at the edge of his cleared fields, watching the late autumn sun cast long shadows across land now prepared for spring planting. Using techniques gleaned from the historical agricultural records Ellie had provided, he had rehabilitated the soil through cover crops and natural amendments, working with the land's inherent qualities rather than imposing conventional methods that had failed previous owners. "Quite a difference from when you arrived," observed Dr. Rebecca Torres, who had joined him for what had become a weekly assessment of the archaeological site. Over the months, their professional relationship had evolved into a friendship based on mutual respect and shared principles. "Land responds to patience and appropriate care," Jack replied, his gaze taking in both the prepared fields and the carefully protected northwestern corner where the stone circle remained preserved under professional archaeological protocols. The story of Jack Mercer's discovery and his subsequent handling of institutional pressures had rippled far beyond Riverbrook County. What had begun as sensationalized reports of treasure and bidding wars had evolved into something far more significant, a case study in principled stewardship that was influencing approaches to similar discoveries across the country. 2 weeks after his controlled disclosure with the local reporter, Jack had received a call from Catherine Whitecloud, director of the Indigenous Cultural Heritage Alliance, a coalition representing multiple nations with historical connections to the region. Their conversation had marked a turning point in the complex situation. "Mr. Mercer," she had said without preamble, "our Council of Elders has been following developments regarding your property. Your approach, prioritizing respectful stewardship over institutional or commercial interests, aligns with our traditional values. We would like to propose a collaborative framework That initial conversation had led to a series of meetings involving indigenous representatives, academic archaeologists, local officials, and eventually museum directors whose institutions had genuine commitment to ethical approaches rather than prestige acquisition. Together, they developed what was now being called the Riverbrook model, a framework for handling significant historical discoveries on private property that balanced multiple legitimate interests while maintaining core ethical principles. The model's foundation was surprisingly simple. Decisions would be guided by the artifact's cultural context and historical significance rather than commercial value or institutional prestige. Property owners' rights would be respected while acknowledging broader cultural heritage implications. Most importantly, indigenous perspectives would be integrated from the beginning rather than consulted as an afterthought. The university board approved our proposal, Dr. Torres reported as they walked the perimeter of Jack's prepared fields. The Collaborative Research Center will be established with joint oversight from academic institutions and indigenous cultural authorities. Your property rights are fully protected through the conservation easement framework. Jack nodded with satisfaction. The approach represented exactly what he had envisioned during those tense early weeks, a balanced solution that respected multiple legitimate interests while maintaining the discovery's integrity. Under the agreement, a small research facility would be constructed on a carefully selected portion of Jack's property, designed to blend with the rural landscape while providing necessary infrastructure for ongoing study. The stone circle and surrounding area would be protected through a conservation easement that preserved Jack's ownership while ensuring appropriate archaeological protocols. Most significantly, the medallion and any further artifacts would remain under a shared stewardship model rather than becoming the exclusive property of any single institution. The Indigenous Apprenticeship Program starts next month, Dr. Torres continued. 5 students from nations with historical connections to this region will receive full scholarships and field training. They'll document their own cultural heritage, rather than having it interpreted solely through academic frameworks. This component had been particularly important to Jack. Throughout his military service, he had witnessed the profound difference between imposed external narratives and authentic cultural voice. The program would ensure that indigenous perspectives remained central to understanding the site's significance. As they approached the farmhouse, Jack noticed a familiar truck parked in the driveway. Frank Dawson, the hardware store owner whose dismissive comments had once symbolized Riverbrook skepticism toward the foolish veteran who had purchased worthless land. "Mr. Mercer," Frank called, approaching with a distinctly different demeanor than during their earlier encounters. "Brought those specialized hinges you ordered for your barn renovation. Figured I'd deliver them personally, see how things are coming along." The transformation in local attitudes had been among the most remarkable developments of recent months, as Jack's thoughtful approach to both farming and archaeological stewardship became apparent. Skepticism had gradually shifted to genuine interest. The same townspeople who had once mockingly taken bets on his inevitable failure now pointed out his property to visitors with proprietary pride, as if they had always recognized its potential. "Appreciate the delivery," Jack replied, accepting the package. "Barn renovation starts next week, once the archaeological assessment of that section is complete." Frank lingered, clearly interested in more than just delivering supplies. "Town council meeting last night. passed that resolution supporting your conservation framework unanimously. Even old Wilson Jenkins voted for it, and he hasn't supported a new idea since 1982. The comment reflected how thoroughly local perspectives had evolved. The Riverbrook model had transformed the town's identity from a struggling rural community to a recognized example of collaborative heritage preservation. Tourism had increased modestly, not the invasive treasure hunters initially feared, but respectful visitors interested in the developing research center and the thoughtful approach to balancing farming with historical preservation. Community support matters, Jack acknowledged. This works because people recognize multiple types of value beyond just commercial considerations. After Frank departed, Jack and Dr. Torres continued their assessment of the archaeological site. The stone circle had been carefully documented using non-invasive technologies that revealed extraordinary details about its construction and alignment with celestial patterns. Ground-penetrating radar had identified additional features beneath the soil, what appeared to be a complex of ceremonial structures dating back, potentially, thousands of years. The dating analysis confirmed our initial estimates, Dr. Torres explained as they reviewed the latest findings. The site shows evidence of continuous ceremonial use spanning at least 15 centuries, making it one of the longest continuously used sacred sites documented in North America. The medallion that had started this journey had proven to be just one component of a much larger historical context. Additional artifacts, carefully excavated under protocols developed collaboratively with indigenous representatives, revealed sophisticated metallurgical techniques previously undocumented in the region. The findings were genuinely rewriting understanding of pre-colonial cultural exchanges and technological capabilities. The comparative analysis with artifacts from the southwestern cultural complexes suggests trade networks far more extensive than previously recognized, Dr. Torres continued, her academic excitement evident despite her professional demeanor. Your discovery is fundamentally changing our understanding of pre-colonial North America. As evening approached, Jack and Dr. Torres joined the small gathering that had assembled on his porch. Ellie Chen, whose initial kindness had proven the foundation for genuine friendship. Sheriff Wilson, whose practical support had been invaluable during the tense early weeks, and Joseph Running Bear, the indigenous elder who had become a regular visitor and valued advisor. These informal meetings had become a tradition as the Riverbrook model developed, a space where different perspectives could be shared with mutual respect rather than institutional positioning. Tonight's gathering held particular significance as they would be reviewing final plans for the research center's groundbreaking ceremony scheduled for the following month. The national press is requesting access, Ellie reported, reviewing correspondence on her tablet, plus 3 documentary film crews and representatives from similar sites in Arizona and New Mexico interested in adapting our framework. We'll need to be selective, Jack replied, considering security and logistical implications with his military planner's mind. Priority to local community, indigenous representatives, and academic partners. Media access should be controlled to prevent the kind of sensationalism we dealt with initially. Joseph nodded agreement. Our council suggests a blessing ceremony before the public events, something authentic rather than performative, honoring the ancestral significance without creating a spectacle. The collaborative discussion continued as twilight deepened, each participant contributing expertise without seeking to dominate the process. The contrast with the institutional power struggles of 3 months earlier could not have been more pronounced. What had begun as competing claims for control had evolved into genuine partnership based on shared principles and mutual respect. As the gathering dispersed into the autumn evening, Jack remained on his porch, reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The worthless land that had drawn mockery from Riverbrook's residents had become the catalyst for something extraordinary. Not just an archaeological discovery, but a model for collaborative stewardship that honored multiple legitimate interests while maintaining core ethical principles. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor. Maxwell Harrington's distinctive Range Rover appeared on Jack's driveway, the first time the Foundation director had returned since their confrontational exchange months earlier. Jack observed his approach with interest, noting the subtle differences in demeanor, less institutional arrogance, more measured assessment. "Mr. Mercer," Harrington began as he exited his vehicle, "I hope this unannounced visit isn't an intrusion. I wanted to speak with you directly before tomorrow's board meeting." Jack invited him onto the porch, offering coffee with the hospitality that was now his established practice with all visitors. "Your foundation hasn't participated in recent discussions," he observed neutrally, "though the invitation remains open for constructive engagement." Harrington nodded, accepting both the coffee and the implied criticism. "That's actually why I'm here. Our board has been following the development of your collaborative framework with considerable interest. It represents a significant departure from established institutional approaches." "Some might say a necessary evolution," Jack suggested. "Indeed." Harrington seemed to be choosing his words with unusual care. "The Foundation's initial approach was traditionally institutional. We've been observing how your alternative framework has garnered support from communities that have historically been skeptical of organizations like ours." The careful phrasing concealed what Jack recognized as a fundamental reassessment. The Eastern States Historical Foundation had expected to secure control through established institutional leverage, financial resources, media relationships, regulatory connections. Instead, they had watched the development of an alternative approach that was gaining national recognition as a model for ethical stewardship. "The Foundation's board has authorized me to explore potential participation in your collaborative framework," Harrington continued. "We recognize that would require accepting established protocols rather than imposing our traditional institutional expectations." Jack studied him thoughtfully, recognizing the significant shift this approach represented. Participation would be welcome, provided it's based on genuine commitment to the core principles: indigenous consultation from the beginning, balanced stewardship rather than institutional ownership, and community involvement rather than external imposition. "Those terms are acceptable," Harrington replied, the slight hesitation revealing how substantial a concession this represented for his organization. "The Foundation has considerable resources that could support your research center's development without compromising its collaborative structure." Their conversation continued with a detailed discussion of how the foundation might contribute constructively within the established ethical framework. By its conclusion, Jack had secured commitments for significant funding that would accelerate the research center's development while maintaining its independent governance structure. As Harrington departed, Jack reflected on the encounter's significance. What had begun as institutional conflict had evolved into potential collaboration, not through compromise of core principles, but through the demonstrated effectiveness of an approach grounded in integrity and mutual respect. The weeks leading to the research center's groundbreaking ceremony brought a steady stream of visitors to the Peterson farm. Academic researchers interested in the collaborative model, indigenous representatives from nations beyond those initially involved, and increasingly, veterans inspired by Jack's example of principled leadership in civilian life. This last group proved particularly meaningful. Jack had not anticipated becoming a reference point for other veterans seeking meaningful post-service paths, but his approach to the unexpected discovery had resonated deeply with those who understood the challenges of transitioning military leadership principles to civilian contexts. Your framework applies the best aspects of military decision-making without the hierarchical limitations, observed Colonel Maria Sanchez, a recently retired Army officer who had traveled from Colorado specifically to understand the River Brook model firsthand. Clear principles, respect for multiple stakeholders, and unwavering integrity when facing institutional pressure. The observation captured what Jack had intuitively recognized from the beginning, that his military experience, far from being irrelevant to his new civilian life, had provided exactly the leadership foundation needed to navigate complex competing interests with principled determination. On the morning of the groundbreaking ceremony, Jack rose before dawn, as was his habit, performing the same disciplined routine that had sustained him through military service and civilian transition alike. The ceremony would bring hundreds of visitors to his property, a dramatic contrast from the solitude he had initially sought in purchasing the neglected farm. Yet as he watched the sunrise illuminate fields now prepared for productive cultivation, Jack felt a deep sense of alignment between his original purpose and the unexpected path that had emerged. He had purchased this land to build something meaningful after years of military service. The collaboration that had developed around the archaeological discovery represented exactly that. A framework that honored history while creating something valuable for the future. The groundbreaking ceremony itself reflected the balanced approach that had become the hallmark of the Riverbrook model. It began with a private blessing led by indigenous elders, honoring the land's ancestral significance without performative display. The public ceremony that followed featured speakers representing the multiple stakeholders in the collaborative framework: academic institutions, indigenous nations, local community, and Jack himself as the property owner whose principled stewardship had made the approach possible. This center represents a new model for historical preservation, Jack stated in his brief remarks, one that recognizes that the most valuable aspects of our shared heritage cannot be measured in commercial terms or claimed through institutional authority. True stewardship requires balancing multiple legitimate interests with respect for the deeper significance of what we discover. As he spoke, Jack noticed familiar faces throughout the assembled crowd. Frank Dawson and other Riverbrook residents who had once mockingly dismissed his purchase. Dr. Torres and her academic colleagues, whose expertise had been essential to understanding the discovery's significance. The indigenous representatives whose cultural perspectives had transformed the framework's fundamental approach. And most recently arrived a group of veterans who had traveled specifically to witness a model of principled leadership in civilian context. The groundbreaking itself was deliberately straightforward. Simple silver shovels turning soil at the research center's planned location, selected to balance archaeological access with minimal disruption to both the ceremonial site and Jack's agricultural plans. The building's design, developed through collaborative input, would integrate harmoniously with the landscape while providing necessary facilities for ongoing research and educational programs. As the formal ceremony concluded and attendees dispersed to various educational presentations around the property, Jack found himself approached by an elderly man he didn't immediately recognize. The visitor's weathered face suggested a lifetime of outdoor work, and his measured gait carried the dignity of accumulated wisdom. "You don't know me," the man began, extending a hand. "Harold Peterson, Jr. My father owned this land before, letting it go to seed in his final years." The name resonated immediately. The Peterson family had owned this property for generations before Jack's purchase, maintaining the mysterious protection of the northwestern corner through decades of agricultural challenges. "Your family preserved something important," Jack acknowledged, shaking the offered hand with genuine respect. "Without knowing exactly what," Peterson confirmed. "Just an obligation passed through generations, that the circle beneath the oak was special, sacred to those who came before us. My father kept the promise, even when financial pressures tempted him to ignore it." The elderly man gazed across the property, taking in both the ceremonial site and the agricultural preparations with evident approval. "He would have appreciated your approach, honoring both the land's productive potential and its deeper history. Most buyers would have chosen one or the other." The conversation continued as they walked the property's perimeter, Peterson sharing family stories that provided additional context to the historical records Ellie had uncovered. The medallion had been glimpsed by earlier generations, Peterson revealed, but always carefully left undisturbed as part of their stewardship promise. His great-grandfather had formally documented the agreement with Seneca representatives in the 1870s, but the family's protective practice had begun long before any written record. "We kept faith without understanding exactly why," the elderly man concluded. "You've brought understanding while maintaining the same faithful stewardship. Different approaches to the same worthy purpose." As afternoon shadows lengthened across the property, the formal events transitioned to a community gathering that reflected Riverbrook's evolved relationship with both Jack and the historical significance of the land they had once dismissed. Local families mingled with academic researchers and indigenous representatives, sharing food and conversation with the natural ease of a community that had discovered unexpected common ground. Frank Dawson approached Jack with a plate of his wife's renowned apple pie, his expression holding none of the dismissive skepticism that had characterized their early encounters. "Town's different since you came," he observed, offering the dessert. "Not just the visitors or the research center, something about how people see possibilities now." Jack accepted the offering with genuine appreciation. "Land often holds more potential than is immediately visible," he replied. True for fields, true for communities, true for people. The simple observation captured what had become increasingly apparent throughout the development of the Riverbrook model, that recognizing multiple forms of value beyond commercial calculations created opportunities for collaborative success rather than competitive conflict. The town that had mockingly dismissed Jack's purchase as worthless land had discovered unexpected benefits through embracing a more nuanced understanding of value across different dimensions. As evening approached and the gathering gradually dispersed, Jack found himself standing once again at the edge of his fields, joined by Dr. Torres and Catherine Whitecloud from the Indigenous Cultural Heritage Alliance. The three had become the informal leadership core of the collaborative framework, each representing essential perspectives while respecting the other's domains of expertise and authority. Today marks a beginning rather than a conclusion, Catherine observed, gazing toward the research center's newly marked foundation. The real test of our model will be sustainable collaboration beyond the initial excitement. The governance structure is designed for exactly that, Dr. Torres confirmed. Balanced authority, transparent processes, genuine respect for different forms of knowledge and expertise. Jack nodded agreement, appreciating both the accomplishment represented by the day's ceremony and the challenges that remained ahead. Military planning recognizes that initial operations establish patterns that shape long-term outcomes. We've built our foundation on principles that can sustain collaborative work through inevitable future challenges. As darkness settled over the Peterson farm, Jack reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 3 months. He had purchased this property seeking simplicity and purpose after years of military complexity, only to find himself at the center of competing historical, cultural, and institutional interests. Yet through that unexpected challenge, he had created something more meaningful than he could have initially imagined. Not just a personal haven, but a model for collaborative stewardship that honored both past and future. The land that Riverbrook's residents had mockingly dismissed as worthless now carried recognized value across multiple dimensions. Agricultural potential being realized through thoughtful cultivation, historical significance being carefully documented, cultural importance being honored through indigenous participation, and community identity being enhanced through association with a nationally recognized model of ethical collaboration. As Jack walked back toward his renovated farmhouse, no longer a dilapidated structure, but a comfortable home that honored its historical character while integrating modern functionality, he felt a deep sense of alignment between his military service and this unexpected civilian mission. Both had required unwavering integrity, strategic patience, cross-cultural respect, and principled leadership in the face of institutional pressure. The worthless farm that had drawn skepticism and mockery had become the foundation for something extraordinary, not measured in commercial terms or institutional prestige, but in the creation of a framework that balanced legitimate interests through mutual respect rather than competitive advantage. In purchasing land that others had dismissed, Jack Mercer had found not just a place to build a new life after military service, but a mission worthy of the leadership principles that had guided him through years of serving his country in more dangerous contexts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in maintaining the collaborative balance they had established. But tonight, standing on land he had transformed from neglected fields to productive cultivation, alongside preserved historical significance, Jack felt the quiet satisfaction of a mission accomplishing its purpose, creating something of lasting value that honored both heritage and hope with equal integrity. The veteran, who had bought a small farm against everyone's advice, had discovered far more than an ancient artifact beneath its soil. He had uncovered the opportunity to demonstrate that principles forged through military service could transform civilian challenges, that competing interests could find common ground through mutual respect, and that true value often lay beneath the surface of what others dismissed as worthless. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.